Confession Lies in Liquor. Written by Pitiful Pesty. Read by Rashi. Ratio never liked going to bars. He had better things to do than going to bars anyway, such as studying quantum physics or reviewing calculus for the 4th time. His studies were one of his first priorities. His brain thought and believed. On the other hand, Ratio's roommate and business student was much more lively when it came to things like these. He attended parties often and went out with his classmates plenty of times for their outings. Aventurine, that's what they called him. He was the one that went to bars often. He was the first to accompany Ratio to his first visit to the bar. The business student showed the scholar the drinks he recommended and the best seats to sit. During the visit, Aventurine mentions the bar they were at was his favorite. Unconsciously, Ratio kept that thought buried in the back of his head since that day. So when his roommate, who was also a notorious gambler, never came back to the shared house, Ratio's first thought was to check here, at Aventurine's favorite bar. Ratio was spotted at the bar over midnight. Very surprising, but to Ratio, he was just here for one thing. Opening the door to the bar, he was stepping out of his comfort zone in this instance. Smooth jazz music filled his ears as a block of cold air hit his face, kind of chilly. There was something intoxicating about this bar's atmosphere. The bar was technically empty, which was reasonable for this hour, although the bar wasn't the most popular place. Ratio would have thought that a more busy, flashy place would be Aventurine's favorite. He was a partygoer after all, but he preferred this petite little jazzy bar that he claimed had some type of charm to it. There was a blonde man sitting at the counter, one hand swirling a cup of cocktail, while the other supporting up his head. Ratio recognizes his roommate's signature earrings he always wore through the blonde locks of his hair. It always reminded him of a peacock. The scholar walked up to the blonde and spoke behind him. "Aventurine?" Ratio called out his name. The scholar waited for some sort of reaction from the student in front of him. "Gambler," Ratio said once more, this time sounding more agitated and impatient. The blonde peeked his head up and turned his head behind him. His eyes hazily dazed into Ratio's, as the corner of his mouth lifted into his signature smile he put on. Ratio knows this smile too well. "You know my name, friend. Do we know each other?" Aventurine asks as he smiles. Ratio looks down on Aventurine. He opened his mouth, but his words were cut off by the gambler. "You must know me from the finance department at school. Or the magazines," Aventurine concluded. Completely false. What magazines was he talking about? Ratio doesn't read magazines. Aventurine's hand gestured at the empty red velvet cushioned seat next to him. "Sit down next to me, friend," Aventurine says, smiling, offering his company to the other man. Without thinking, Ratio absent-mindedly took a seat on the empty cushioned chair next to the blonde. When he got comfortable in his seat was only when he did realize what he was doing. He just took this damn finance student's offer without thinking about it. He couldn't back out now. Ratio looked at Aventurine. He was able to see his face much more clearly now. His smooth skin and face flushed with a light, red tint from the cocktail he was pleasantly sipping on. Ratio doesn't know what Aventurine's limit is, but only remembers that it's quite high. For Aventurine not to recognize his own roommate's face, Ratio would expect he drank something much stronger before, or had a lot of drinks before this one. Ratio frowns. Did someone else peer pressure him to drink this much? Drinking too much can weaken his immune system. Ratio makes eye contact with the bartender. "Just a cup of water, please," Ratio tells the bartender, as he was quickly served immediately. Aventurine perked up and stared at the man next to him. "Only water? Do tell me, friend, are you not into any of the drinks?" Aventurine asked, as his eyes locked onto the other man's face, swirling his glass in his hand. "I don't drink often," Ratio replies. His hand moved to Aventurine's cup and placed it down on the counter. He moved Aventurine's drink in front of him and shielded it away from the business student. The blonde frowned slightly at the man, but the frown quickly dissipated as he started to talk again. "What drink do you like?" Aventurine asked, making small talk with the man beside him. Ratio stopped for a second. "Old-fashioned," Ratio said. It was the alcohol that he remembered, mostly because it was the one Aventurine said he'll like the last time they were here. "Why don't you order that?" the blonde asks. "I'm not here to drink alcohol." Yeah, he was here to pick someone back to their shared house. "Then why are you here, my friend? This is a bar, a place where alcohol is your best friend," Aventurine said, smiling. His hand successfully grabbed his glass back into his possession. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment. His eyelashes are quite long. "I'm here to get someone," Ratio said. He hopes Aventurine will come to his senses soon. Aventurine smiles and hums a sound of understandment. "I'm here because of someone too," he says, hands reaching up to his face as his fingers touched his cheek lightly. "Did you fail a test? Since you're here, I guess I can tell you about someone. The person why I'm here." Ratio was going to stop him, but the business student kept talking. "There's a certain person I'm interested in." Ratio sighs and decides to play along with him. He taps his finger on the glass of water and listened to Aventurine as his fingertip traced the pattern the glass was shaped in. He never noticed how awfully pretty the gambler is. His face is laughing softly at himself as he talks. "Who is the person you're interested in?" Ratio asks. He knows he shouldn't take advantage of his roommate in a state like this, but some part of him also wants to know. And Aventurine was the first to start talking about it, so he brought the topic up upon himself. He watched as the corner of Aventurine's mouth lifted into a smile. "There's a certain doctor, or to-be doctor, at my university," Aventurine said. Aventurine put both hands on his cheek, leaving the glass of alcohol on the table to be stolen again by the man. Aventurine notices, but doesn't say anything about it. "How lucky I was to be able to get paired with him as my roommate. Mother Goddess must be blessing me," the business student said. His voice became soft as he talked about this man. "Maybe you know him. He's in the mathematics department, kind of famous in that place. His name is Veritas Ratio." Ratio didn't dare breathe. Aventurine went on to tell this man in front of him all about Ratio, his good looks, intelligence, characteristics, and much more. He went into detail about his first impressions of the good student, and what he thought about this man now. Aventurine told him stories about Ratio. He told him how they first met, the clothes they were wearing, Ratio's expression on that fateful day, even to the things Ratio talked about. Every detail was engraved into Aventurine's mind like a tattoo. He told stories and events that happened that led to the blonde having a crush on the scholar. The gambler told him about how his feelings grew and sprouted. Ratio was perfect. Aventurine expressed this a lot. He talked quite a lot about this to the man. "Isn't he great? Good-looking, intelligent." Aventurine was cut off by the man beside him. He stopped his words and glanced at the man. "This man, whom you speak of, isn't really all you say," the man said. The business student looked at him and kept his casual smile on his face, hand resting on his palm. The man piqued his interest. He wanted to listen to him and his reasoning. Even with studying all his life, he couldn't get recognized by any top universities or colleges. All the colleges he once wished to get accepted by them didn't accept him. In the end, he had to go to this college, that may be high in the country, but can never compare to the school in the universe. Aventurine keeps his smile. That's because those top fancy universities can't teach him anymore. He's too good for them. The blonde keeps smiling. They don't deserve him anyways. He's too smart for even those genius professors to teach him new ideas and topics. I must say it is a miracle he came to this university. If he went to one of those top universities, I would have never met him. But my luck is always good, so I'll end up meeting him somehow. Aventurine slips his hand past the man's arms and takes back his drink. When he held it in the air, the man covered the cup with his hand, preventing Aventurine from drinking from it. The man cleared his throat, other hand still covering the glass. "Don't you ever think he's arrogant? Annoying? Stuck up and full of himself?" the man asks. Aventurine put the drink with his eyebrows, frowning down after realizing he won't be able to drink from it. "I think all those things about him are what make him captivating," the gambler says, smiling. "It's what makes Veritas Ratio. I think his arrogant personality makes him more attractive." He paused for a second. "My life is a gamble, and I'm betting my feelings on him." The gambler sure has interesting taste. Aventurine says these things to the man in front of him. He can't really see the man's face. It's all blurry to his eye. It's his fault anyways. He probably drank too much earlier. Everything was fuzzy. The thought of Ratio was the only thing in his mind right now. The business student focused on Ratio. He thought the man who offered the seat beside him was an interesting fellow. The sudden change in mouth and brow movements made it clear the other man was surprised hearing his words. Why was that? Did he say something that offends him? He poured all his emotions out while talking about the scholar. He told the man about the time he spent 3 days crying in his dorm because he thought Ratio hated him after their argument. Aventurine also talked about all the times he would secretly wait for Ratio's lecture to end and pretend they bumped into each other coincidentally, as an excuse to walk home together. There was also a time where Ratio didn't sleep for 3 days and planned not to sleep again. Aventurine started, head slumping onto the counter with his eyes staring at the floating ice cubes, slowly dissolving into his drink. The man in front of him flinches. He remembers this. This was about 3 months ago. He was studying for one of his exams, and for once he doubted himself with his outcome scores. He studied for countless hours, and even during his lunch and dinner. It would be embarrassing if a top student like him didn't get full marks. He can't stand those eyes. The eyes that showed people were ashamed of him. The eyes that showed people were ashamed of him. Those eyes that clearly said they overestimated his abilities. The eyes that are always watching him and his every move since childhood. Those people are waiting for him to mess up. As long as the scholar was being watched by those eyes, he couldn't make an escape. He had tried to keep up his impeccable reputation that was a cloud that surrounded him. But in the end, he accidentally fell asleep the night before his exam. He remembered his mental breakdown he had right before the exam in the bathroom that was right across the lecture room. But upon returning to the examination room and his test paper, the exam was much easier than he expected it to be. He didn't need all that studying he did for those past 3 days he didn't sleep. Now thinking back on it, maybe he was a bit overdramatic during his breakdown. If he hadn't slept that day, he would not sleep for 4 days and maybe end up in the hospital. His heart rate was really messed up after that. He drank 3 cups of coffee and ran purely on caffeine, the business student recalled. Yes, he knew that. I mixed sleeping pills into his tea the night before the test. They worked well, and put him to sleep after a bit. The man in front of him froze at this information. I put a blanket over him when he fell asleep, but when he woke up, I think he was in too much of a panic to realize, Aventurine said, sounding somewhat disappointed, or saddened. Aventurine thought this was interesting. He thinks that if he messes up, everyone will discard him. That might be true for the Genius Society. But to me, no matter how bad he scores or how high he gets, Ratio is already perfect the way he is, Aventurine said, picking back up and looking at his reflection from the drink in the glass. Something sparked inside of Ratio at this moment. His heart is burning, and it's definitely not in an inflammatory immune system response. The business student's cheeks are red, and his ears are too. His makeup was already washed off. "It seems like you like him a lot," the man said. "I do," Aventurine stated, looking at the man. "I really do like him." He looked embarrassed. "I like him a lot, but I can't tell Ratio," he half shouted. He's embarrassed. "I don't even know if he likes men. There are so many other people better than me for him, so I can't possibly confess. I'm not like the other people in his department. I'm not smart, and I'm only smart in poker and casino settings, but in intellectual stuff, I'm hopeless. Someone cute in his department would be a better fit for him, and even if I don't get rejected, I might just be a burden to him," he complained, words slowly slurring together. "Look at me, getting ahead of myself thinking Ratio will ever return those feelings." Aventurine grabbed his alcohol and took a big gulp of it down his throat, before the man stopped him by grabbing his wrist. Aventurine froze and placed down the cup. The man let go of the blonde's wrist. He breathed in and breathed out. "You can definitely try," the man told the drunk. Aventurine smiled at the man. "And would you take the blame for me? Would you take the blame for my depression after I get rejected by that scholar?" Aventurine asked. The man pushed a cup of water to the blonde. "You're a strange person, friend. Drink some water, Aventurine," the man said. He watched as Aventurine hesitantly took the cup and raised it up to his lips. His lips pressed against the edge of the rim and tilted the cup up slightly for the water to pour down into his mouth. Aventurine's lips are pink. Suddenly, Ratio felt a strange feeling. He had a classmate of his during a lecture talk to him about one of those historical romance books he was interested in. His classmate read a few lines from the ending of the novel aloud to the scholar, which were talking about the romantic closure the female lead and the male lead had at the end of the story. "Her lips were painted a cherry red, as it matched the colors on her cheeks. With her mouth open slightly, she looked up at the Duke eagerly, as the man in black leaned down and—" Ratio frowned. Why was he thinking of that right now? He looked at his drunk roommate. His cheeks are pink, similar to his lips. Aventurine's hair was a bit messy, but was styled the way he usually has it. Did he purposefully get drunk here? Ratio reached out his hand towards Aventurine. Noticing the approaching hand, Aventurine put his cheek to the palm of the man's hand. Ratio reminded him of a cat. Roughly, Ratio caught both of Aventurine's cheeks in his hand and brought it up to his face. Does this guy really let anyone take advantage of him? Slowly, Ratio lifted his face close to his, but stopped. He removed his hands from his face and set his head to the counter, slowly and gently. Aventurine is slowly dozing off. He shouldn't take advantage of him when he's unconscious and not thinking right. Ratio lifted up 2 fingers to his lips and pressed them against it, kissing his fingers and bringing those 2 fingers to Aventurine's lips. He lightly pressed his fingers against the blonde's lips and held it there for a few seconds before retracting back. "That should do for now," Ratio said. "I don't think he will reject you." Ratio smiled, closing his eyes. He held Aventurine's hand and stood up. "Let's get you home now, gambler. You'll probably forget about this when you wake up. You would also probably have a hangover, so let's stop by the convenience store before heading home."